Hi, and welcome to Labs to Explain from Our National Conversation. I'm your host, Harmony, and I am the journalism team lead on Our National Conversation. In this episode of Labs to Explain, we're talking about Gen Z and the military. Before we get started, I would like for our panelists to do a little self-introduction.
Hi, my name is Connor, and I'm the core content team lead here at ONC. I'm also a full-time graduate student at the University of Oklahoma, where I'm pursuing a master's in global affairs. And that's it for me.
And then Liz, could you introduce yourself?
There you go. My name is Elizabeth Bradley. I'm actually the Chief Operating Officer at Our National Conversation. And just a side note and fun fact that I am a spouse of an active duty service member. So my husband is in the Marine Corps and has been for a little over 10 years now. And I also have worked at the college level with military services.
And then Alex, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Alex Julian. I am a graduate. I am a podcast intern here at ONC. I'm a graduate of Los Angeles Film School with 2 degrees. I have one in music production and the other in digital filmmaking. And particularly for this episode, I have numerous family members who have been in the military. My mom's retired from the Air Force. My dad is also retired from the Air Force. And I had numerous uncles in the Army. My stepfather is also in the Army. And I had a couple of cousins who were in the Marines.
And then Nate, if you could finish us off.
Sure. My name's Nate Peterson. I am a team lead here for the Historical Accuracy and Research team at ONC. I'm currently getting my master's in public policy at Pepperdine, and I was in the military. I was in the Army for a little over 10 years. I was enlisted for a little bit and then went to school, graduated, and became an officer, and I was in the infantry for most of my time.
And it's great to have all of you here with me to discuss military and Gen Z. So first, I kind of want to just dive on in and talk about the declining interest in serving in the military. So we know Gen Z as a whole, and I feel, kind of compelled to say this as a younger member of Gen Z, we really prioritize, our education and, becoming smarter people. A lot of us, we don't know a lot about this world, so we're kind of interested in really advancing ourselves in our education. Gallup reported in late 2023, a majority of the youngest members of Gen Z, those who are still enrolled in K-12 schools, which it kind of includes me, view a college education as important, and I think important around 85% of them view it very important. And they intend to pursue a degree after high school. So my question to you all is, why would a member of Gen Z choose to join the military rather than prioritize their education and then career, and then maybe even build a family?
That's a good question. So the reasons why we see a lot of, well, not nowadays, but in the past, a lot of people joined the military was they felt a duty to serve and because of the numerous callings. For instance, after the bombings of Pearl Harbor and with 9/11, people were signing up to join the military because they felt it was their duty to protect their country because they felt violated because we were directly attacked. And the other benefit with joining the military before going to college is that it gives you benefits for your future and it makes you feel more secure. That's why we see a lot of people, prefer to do boot camp, BMT, and all that other stuff in their particular branch of service. And then they do their educations because it can also give them a secure future. Because with right now, with what we're seeing and throughout the past several years, and if not decades, student loans and stuff like that, and a lot of people struggling. But with the military, they will actually help you pay it off rather sooner rather than later, so you don't have to spend as much, which is a great benefit.
I think that's a good few reasons to start us off as someone that's, on the younger side.
Yeah, so I think that Gen Z isn't joining the military. I mean, Alex just listed a lot of great reasons as to why they could, and I think those reasons have remained pretty much a constant throughout the inception of our volunteer volunteer force. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, after 9/11, just like Alex said, there was a lot of reason to to join the military, deep-seated feelings of patriotism and a willingness to go into the military and to make a career out of it. But I think things have changed this day and age. We live in the digital age, and I think that nowadays, in comparison, with joining, say, the army or any other branch 20 or 25 years ago, you can open your phone and go on the internet and see the horrors of war. I witnessed the trench warfare that's going on in Ukraine. I can see these raw, uncensored videos on the internet. That's something you couldn't see, 20 years ago when you were looking to serve your country after 9/11. So I think that aspect is pretty off-putting to a lot of young people who might be considering joining the military in that sense. But also, I think Gen Z is looking for flexibility, and the military is not really known for that. I think that if you're going into the military to pursue a career, you're probably looking at, well, you're definitely looking at commitment, right? If you're going in for the long haul, and it's not necessarily the sort of institution where you can swap careers, which is kind of a running theme among millennials and Gen Z as well. We don't stay in one place for too long. And so the military's model doesn't really fit that, it seems like. And yeah, I think the military has a lot of problem solving to do in the coming years, and something I know they've been looking at on how to solve this crisis. But yeah, they missed their mark by about 41,000 recruits in 2023 collectively. So they got some work to do.
I definitely agree with you there. And I'm really glad you brought up the point of, they're lacking in hiring and recruitment, because that was a really big talking point when talking about the military and what changes need to be made. So Liz, if you could offer your take on this question.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot that's been echoed kind of before. I'll just maybe shed a little light on talking about duty to service. I think the other kind of key component here is, well, what's the motivation for others who are joining? And that may be that economically it's one of their only options. And so even though they may prioritize education, say you have someone in Gen Z who is a part of that 85% that really prioritizes education, they know that they can't afford the loans that they're going to take out. They can't afford to start out, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in debt. And so economically, it makes sense. And that's why they join. And then through the military, once you have a certain time of service in, you can get tuition assistance. They know when they get out, they can get their GI Bill if they do, their time. And so there's a few different kind of benefits that get offered, and then they're really set up and they can pull themselves out of a position that maybe they want to pull themselves out of. And so when we're kind of looking at why would Gen Z want to join the military, I think that's like a motivating factor that should definitely be included.
That brings up a really good point, especially when you're talking about the GI Bill, because I know I have friends now that kind of are thinking about utilizing that. And I think it's like a great way, because as you mentioned, you don't want to start off a lot of debt, especially when, you're fresh out of high school, or like you're in the process of getting into college. You don't want to start off with, so much on your plate. The next person I want to kind of give a jab at this question is Nate.
Yeah, I actually think you're not sacrificing your education or your career aspirations. I think joining the military is actually a great opportunity for people who don't have a clear direction of where they want to go or what they want to do. Because at 18, 19, 20 years old, you might not know what you want to do for the rest of your life. And that's okay. That's expected. You're supposed to use the next 10, 12 years, figuring out what that is that you're passionate about, what you like. And going into the military is a great way to figure that out. It's a great way to understand and learn about yourself, who you are, what passions do you have, what are you interested in. Not only that, you're gaining great skills and experience in doing that. So when you come out and you apply, maybe you want to apply to and get a degree after you get out, then you use the GI Bill like Liz was saying, and then you don't have to pay anything. And so you come out, you have a job, you're getting great benefits, you're finding out more about yourself, you're gaining skills and experience, and then you go and are more specific in the education and the direction you want to go, and it's paid for. And so you're not just not starting from debt, you actually are able to go moving forward from a place of having had a job and experience and all these things. So it really puts you actually, I would say, way ahead of your peers in that respect, because you have so much more experience. Plus the other benefits of a VA loan. When I graduated college and I went to my first duty station, the VA loan lets you buy a house without any down payment up to a certain amount. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have the VA loan. So that allowed me to purchase something while I was at my duty station, where I was serving at first. And things like that bring economic benefits later on in life. I wouldn't have been able to do that without the military. And so there's a lot of great benefits to joining, I would say. And you're not giving, I would say you're not giving up things necessarily. You look at it more like, these are the things that I'm really gaining.
I think you all kind of offer really good perspectives when it comes to, tensions as to why someone joined the military. And that's kind of why I wanted to start us off with that question, because it kind of leads into this next section that I want to dive into. Is pretty much the growing distrust and the changing perceptions of the military. We find a lot, like, I'll use my family for reference. If I were to say, for example, that I want to become a part of the military, I know I will get a lot of disapproval from family members who may or may not have served. This is pretty common among Gen Z, and I'm sure it was common around other generations as well. Like, I guess my main question is, how can the military convince members of Gen Z to join the military? Like, what can be done to help, maybe bring recruitment numbers back up despite this issue? I hope I phrased that right. So, Alex, you can start us off.
Good question. So one of the things that I've noticed, and even with my little brother, he's right now trying to join the army, but my father, who is a military veteran, is right now disapproving. I think that what the military does need to definitely do better and take care of is mental health. Of course, my uncles and my father were all shipped to the Middle East during the 2000s, and with the numerous conflicts like that happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I had an uncle who died in Afghanistan. So I think that we need to prioritize mental health. And this is not just, of course, with the military, it's for all of society, because mental health issues are a major issue that continues to plague society today. So, I think the military needs to help invest in, with especially the younger generations, with Gen Z and millennials. How are they going to help people who've dealt with numerous issues? There are, drill sergeants and drill instructors who do care for people who are in the military and struggling with their mental health issues, but not everyone does, of course, and they just ship them off to the mental ward. And I don't think those mental wards do much for people. Like, we really need to be investing more into mental health and how we are going to, as a society and the military, take care of it. Because, when you actually see what's really going on, within the world with, war and stuff, I mean, it messes people up. But we do need, maybe like if Gen Z were to see that the military would offer good counseling and guidance through these issues, because it's not just, of course, with war, when you go to boot camp and stuff, you're going to be away from your family, and then you get stationed at a certain point in somewhere in the country or even around the world. So that is something we definitely need to address, I believe. And if we show Gen Z that we will offer help and guidance and counseling, I would say would definitely bring up the recruitment numbers, because we just need to make them feel like they'll be taken care of.
You bring up a really, really good point. I just have one question for you. When you're talking about like mental health issues and how it affects people serving in the military, what specifically are you kind of describing? Are you talking about PTSD, or like what other problems can someone expect, but really are affecting people's mental health when they serve in the military?
It's not just one thing, it's numerous things. From what I've seen, it is both PTSD and separation anxiety, from what I said earlier. but it can also be a lot of different things. Like, it could be, of course, OCD, because when you have a very strict schedule at times, like when you're joining the military, or when you start out at BMT or boot camp, you're going to have to go through things, and you're going to be sticking to a schedule. It's not like, oh, I can just do whatever I want and be spontaneous about it. No, you're going to do everything in a certain order and a certain time. And that's how it is. And that because they need you to learn about discipline and adjusting to a routine and working. That's what the military is about. Strictness and discipline.
Thank you for expanding on that. Next, to kind of give their take on this question, I would like for Connor. So basically, I'm asking, family members often disapprove of military service. So what are some ways that this problem can be mitigated? So what take do you offer on this?
Oh boy, that's a tough question. I think that, well, just to touch on Alex's point there, he does make a good point about addressing mental health concerns, which I think is a huge problem in our society today. And I think that just the sheer number of young people who claim that they suffer from some sort of mental handicap or illness is just a pretty damning indictment on our society, because this isn't just like part of human nature. I mean, to a degree it is, but at these levels, they're unprecedented in human history. And that's largely because of, the age we live in. We live in the digital age, and there's a lot of other repercussions that we've been witnessing since the end of the Second World War up until now. Our society has changed a lot. And so it is important that the military addresses those things, and provides younger recruits with resources to properly address that. But as far as figuring out how to solve this huge conundrum of gaining the public trust back, especially among young people, because those are the people that you want to be recruiting, right? So if we're talking about distrust, public distrust, we can split that into categories, right? So you have distrust among the left and the right, and sometimes they overlap, and they also share unique perspectives on this take as well. And when we're talking about young people on the left these days, which is a lot of people, that distrust and disdain for the military is it's essentially an extension of the distrust of America, of American public institutions, and our legacy over the last few decades, especially since the end of the Cold War in 1991. I think a lot of young Americans, myself included, and personally, I'm a conservative, but I can agree with young folks on the left in our assessment of American foreign policy ventures over the last 30 years. They're largely, to me, they reek of poor poor attempts at statecraft, and also just things of that nature, right? Being the global police is not something that the young generation is interested in on the right or the left. Young people on the right are interested in fighting wars in far off parts of the globe, because they don't want to die for these causes. They don't see the connection here. So I think gaining the trust of young people, I'm not sure how you would go about doing that. It would have to reflect a broader change in American foreign policy and American values, and how we treat the rest of the globe, and how we deal with international politics. Which, to me, I don't really see how that course is going to shift anytime soon. But to me, it would have to reflect that broader change in international affairs by the American political establishment.
I think that is a really good like point as someone that's on on a younger side when it comes to Gen Z. One reason why I'm not really interested in serving is, I prefer to start off in, college. I want to go straight from high school to college. That's just what I think is best for me. Not only that, but as you said, the way the US functions like as a, global policing force, Vietnam was just a disaster. But I feel that Vietnam was just a really good example as to how things that could go wrong go wrong.
Yeah, I'm gonna make this quick because I know other people want to speak on this as well. I wanted to hammer on a point that uh, has caught my attention recently. My closest friend of 20 years served 4 years in the army as an NCO. Or he achieved that rank eventually, but this is something him and I discussed regarding this issue, and it seems like young men, Gen Z in particular, is a demographic that's shifting more to the right, and the military is necessarily it's a kind of a violent institution. It's rough around the edges, and it's a kind of a masculine thing. And so this is a conversation I'd had with my friend, and he had told me that if you look at a lot of the policies that have been going into the military in recent years, it's kind of reflecting this feminization of the military. And so, if you're fighting wars, you want to recruit people uh, who are able to fight wars, and the people who do that best are tend to be young men. Not in all aspects of the military, but if you're talking about fighting trench warfare or facing off against a Taliban fighter in a knife fight, we want our strong, healthy young men doing that. I think young men who might be inclined to join the military are looking at this trend and they're saying, well, maybe not. That's not the military my father served. That's not the military my grandfather served. And while yes, it's important to take people's feelings into consideration, at the end of the day, the military is an institution that we use to outsource violence to protect America and to protect our way of life. A lot of people that live in third world countries don't have the option of outsourcing violence. They either get to commit violence and defend their families on a daily basis, or they could perish and be destroyed. And so we have the luxury of outsourcing that violence to the military, so we can live prosperous and happy lives here in America. And when you change the nature of that institution, um, from a necessarily masculine institution into something completely different, it alienates the very people that you want to bring into your doors.
So yeah, what's really going on with governments. But, you know, I mean, I don't always trust our allies, like, because sometimes they have manipulative tactics to use the United States and possibly Europe as well for our own protection. And, like that is to an extent, wrong, because there are times other foreign governments that are corrupt. I'm pretty sure a lot of adults don't want their kids, having to fight a conflict that will not result in any that won't result in any good happening or any benefit happening for any countries like America or our allies, like with what we saw with what happened with Vietnam, and that is something I think we saw also with the Middle East.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a great question to talk or like to kind of talk through. And I think there's lots of different factors that go into this. I think a big one is maybe connected to what Connor was talking about earlier on just the change in focus of recruitment efforts of the U.S. military and who they're trying to draw. And I think one of the huge things and one of the real big benefits of the military, it's been probably one of the most effective, if you want to call melting pot, I don't know if that's like a term that's not well received anymore, but it was a place where race relations actually were the most effectively integrated, where it didn't matter what race you were serving next to each other, you saw the person as they were, and that broke down the barriers, because you needed to rely on this person. It didn't matter the color of skin, where they were from, what accent they had, like you were fighting with them. And so it helped break those barriers down. I think the attempts recently of trying to do that, maybe as an attempt of, the military being the forefront. I think the challenge comes in what's the motivation and what's driving those desires to make the military kind of a social experiment, if you will, in that respect. I think that it being a place where everybody comes and can serve together regardless of your gender, sex, like your race, orientation, whatever it is. I think that's a huge thing. The problem comes when that becomes the focus of the organization, when it is intentionally trying to do that. And that's not the job of the military. The job of the military is to fight and win our nation's wars. And that's dictated by the government, by our president and the Congress. And so I think a lot of the narrative recently has centered around maybe America's not that special or great. And so there's almost this, and I'm not saying it is, I'm saying that the narrative is we should in some ways be not as proud of our nation. Even though for some reason millions and millions of people still want to come here and will pay lots of money and risk death to come here, there's been a focus of like, we're not really that, we shouldn't really be that proud. And I felt that too. And in a lot of ways, I've like had to reflect and like process that through myself. But there's a danger in that, because then what is our military to do? It's to defend our values. It's to defend our way of life. And if we become less, if we're just less interested in doing that, if the next generation is like, well, like we've got a lot of problems and therefore that's not worth defending, that's a really big issue. And so I think while we have had issues, I think the conversation around what is America, why are we who we are, and what makes us a place where millions of people want to come here, even though we have issues. We're never going to be perfect, but how do we shift that to still say you can still be proud in your country even though we're not perfect and even though we have to right wrongs?
Well, I would like to start us off when it comes to, but what's being described as a toxic work environment when it comes to the military. Recently, Gen Z recruits have taken to TikTok to comment about food and pay. As the generation becomes more aware of these bad working conditions, they become more likely to serve. How could Gen Z clean up the work conditions?
Yeah, I think if we circle back to the question of like the toxic work environment, right? And I know your example is a small, probably subset of what the actual range of issues of a toxic work environment are. But I think the bigger kind of concern that I have, and then I think most of the US is aware, is the mental health crisis, because it affects society, outside of the military. And, we're looking at, like, specifically for me, I know the Marine Corps Times said, like, the Marine Corps in 2022 had the highest, suicide rates. My husband can count on, both hands, time in service, people who have committed suicide, people he knew, people he worked with, and these are really sobering things. Like, these are real people, these are humans. So I'm glad Alex brought that up, because these are, you're waking up one morning and your buddy doesn't show up for work. And we're not talking like overseas, we're talking over here in the United States. Your buddy doesn't show up to work, you go to his barracks room and he's not alive anymore. Like, I think we need to be very, very real about this problem. And part of that, a huge part of that, is the toxic work environment. And so when we talk about it's the feminization of the military, it very much feels like in conflict with this need to look at what's causing this mental health problem. And sometimes that gets chalked up to the loss of autonomy, which happens a lot in the military. You're looking at the prioritized leadership styles. So it's a very authoritarian style leadership, which I know in certain parts they're trying to change. But it's hard to do when you're looking at a institution that's built from the top down. And so when we're looking at a toxic work environment and the implications it has, and the bigger kind of issue here with mental health, and we've seen statistics on service members committing suicide and veterans committing suicide, and the really high numbers. I'm kind of looking internally at, yes, they should have access to proper food, to proper drink, but I think mentally what's happening with that loss, kind of that sense of self, you're being removed from where you were born and raised. They're kind of stripping down who you are as a person to build you back up with your people around you, to create that strong sense of camaraderie. What is happening, and where is that breakdown? Because we can't just chalk it up to just PTSD overseas, because we're seeing it here in the States. We're seeing it here in people who have not been deployed. And so I'd love to kind of hear Nate talk a little bit about this. And for me, I think there's more conversation I'd like to have about that toxic work environment. How do we approach it if there is this feeling of this feminization of the military, and is approaching mental health and trying to address what's causing mental health concerns part of the feminization? So how do you kind of deal with the conflict of the two?
Yeah, that's I don't really honestly have a good answer to that. That's a great question, because in some ways you could say they do conflict. I think there's I think we have to be we have to make it okay. I'm not sure. Obviously, I've been out for a number of years. I've been out, but there has to be, and it was doing a better job. That the military as a whole was doing a better job of making sure that service members exiting went through. They basically had to go through certain things that talk to psychologists, or there were a number of things that you had to check off the box to check the box. The problem is anything as big as the military, it becomes a check the box thing. So there's not an individual focus on what are the individual's needs, because it becomes so, we have to do this with so many people. It has to become almost assembly line like, where we can actually allow this many people to go through this process, but that really defeats in a lot of ways the benefits of what they're trying to do, as far as identifying any mental health issues and with the service members getting out. The challenge with what the military has to do is we're trying to prepare people, like you said, we're breaking them down and building them back up into a thing into an organization where they can go out and fight and do hard things and win battles. And so the challenge is, how do you get somebody in that mental mindset where they can actually do that, while also ensuring they understand the value of processing emotions? Because in some ways, the things that you might have to do conflict with maybe internally, or you're like, okay, these things are not, this doesn't jive, or okay, some of what people would call hazing, or the training that you go through, and maybe you're getting yelled at, and all of these things, it's almost like we would say that's traumatic now, or people might call that going through trauma. But it's like, how else do you get somebody to that place where they're able to go into a very difficult situation and do what they need to do, and potentially kill somebody that's on the other side? How do you do that? And I don't know if there's a great answer for that. You're seeing this in Russia, and I'm sure Ukraine too, but you hear of these soldiers going back, and there's crime and there's shooting and murders that people are doing in Russia because of their experience on the battlefields in Ukraine. And so it's certainly not an American problem, and as far as our military goes. I don't honestly have a great answer for it. It's something that it needs to be continued to process and thought through.
And I think when it comes to a lot of issues in the military, that time and really a lot of consideration needs to be kind of embedded into every decision, because you're talking about people, and people aren't objects. They require a lot of attention, and they need to be handled properly. Next, I kind of want to save on time and really go into our next section, because it kind of talks about what we've been talking about, and it's about really mental health in a way, but also safety. Because in the military, I'm sure you've probably heard now and then that sexual assault has been a pretty prominent issue. And as of 2022, there were 8,000-ish reports of sexual assault across the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. And as of March this year, the military has launched an ambitious effort to hire and train more than 2,000 experts focused on preventing sexual assault and other harmful behaviors within its ranks. So my big question is this an example of policy that kind of is in the right direction, really addressing the issues when it comes to mental health and other problems within the military? Is this a step in the right direction, or should another angle be taken to really address these problems? I would really love for Liz to start us off because I feel like she would offer a good opinion on this issue.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think bringing people in is a great first step. External resources outside of the chains of command in the different military branches. I think the challenge that I see is through the kind of institution of the military, there being still hurdles to jump through to get to those resources. And there's always going to be, we have office politics in corporations, there's politics in most institutions. And so keeping certain things quiet can be a priority. We're talking about the image, we're talking about recruitment, we're talking about, other than the military, the government that rules the military. I think there's room for improvement. I'll just say, I think there's room for improvement on getting these human beings in the military to these resources in a more timely manner. I'm not sure if it also directly addresses like the systemic issue and why those things are happening. But I think when the digital age, you are seeing more things come to light than initially were, seen before the digital age. And so hopefully with that, the more people press and bring attention, that these issues can be worked on and resolved. But I think that's kind of all I have to offer on that.
Yeah, honestly, I don't really have too much insight to offer. I don't have a firsthand experience with the military, unlike Nate or Liz through her husband. But yeah, I mean, when we're talking about stuff like sexual assault, that sort of stuff is never okay. And I'm all for deploying more resources to permeate every branch and facet of the military, so that those resources can be available to everybody who's a member of this institution. Because yeah, I mean, abuse of power is just a very common thing in human nature, and sexual assault, it happens in the military, it happens in the civilian realm, wherever people find themselves in positions of power and they feel that they're able to exercise that with impunity. That's where you find things like that happening, and the military is no exception. So I'm all for it if we're investing more into programs to prevent these things. I'm sure Nate has some good stuff to say on it.
I think again, it goes back to how do you hundreds of thousands of people in these things and make it effective. So we'd have, trainings that every quarter, I think there was a sexual assault and harassment prevention training. And there was a separate one that was suicide prevention training. Everybody had to sign in and everybody had to go do this and sit in, and you go through a lecture or, a presentation, and that checks the box, right? It checks the box because the Army, the DoD needs to say, hey, we've gone through this training, we've trained them all in suicide prevention. We're doing what we need to do to fight suicide in the ranks. And you would go to those trainings and there was no benefit from it. Very honestly, frankly, I think there was very little benefit that came from those, but it checked the box. It allowed them to say they were doing something. And I'm not saying that the people making these decisions have this mentality of, oh, we just need to do something to get Congress off our back or to show the American public we're doing it. I don't think we know how to make it actually effective. Part of the problem is when we hear of the military and these things happening in the military, we're shocked because there's a perception, again, the military has done this, especially the Marines. The Marines are great at PR and like I give it to them because people look at the Marines and like, man, the Marines and like honor and integrity in the uniform and it's beautiful. But the problem with that is there's nothing wrong with that if you're trying to recruit. The problem is that persona of the military in the public's eye makes it look like for some reason, because you've enlisted, it suddenly means you have a certain level of character or a certain level of integrity, or you are a certain person just because you enlisted. That's not the case. Our military is a subsection of our society. And so if there is sexual assault, and if there is rape, and if there is murder, and if there are troubling things going on in our society, it's going to inevitably show up in our military. But it's more shocking because we have this perception that, oh, like the military, like, of course, you know, and maybe there is maybe the percentage is different or something. But the problem is that there's this automatic perception of you're automatically different just because you wear a uniform. And again, on average, maybe that is slightly different, but the reality is there's still going to be people in there that are not abiding by that aren't honorable. They're not full of integrity, and they don't treat people the same way. And they do abuse power, like Connor was saying, and they do use that for their own benefit and maybe sexually abuse somebody or discriminate or whatever. And so I think some of the shock comes from, wow, there's like all of these sexual assaults in the army, like, or in the military, like, how could that be? Well, it's because we pull from society, and our society is still flawed and it's still broken. And so the question is, how do we actually take those principles and the things that they teach at a larger level and want to impart by doing the check the box and saying, hey, these are the things we're teaching. How do we do that on the individual level? How do we get those things down to the individual level to where it's actually filling the person, the soldier, the airman, the Marine, the sailor, how and changing them as a person, instead of just kind of, okay, we just need to do this. Let's get Congress off our back. So I think that's the challenge. And I don't know if there's a great answer for that. But yeah. And I honestly, the 2,000 experts, like, again, like, I hope it makes a difference. I'm skeptical just because I'm not sure if, I don't know if the big solution is really gonna or the big thing that they're trying to do with all these experts is gonna actually affect the individual person at the lowest level. So.
Before we go into our next section, pretty much about the budget and balancing that, I want to for us to just address one more question that I think really brings the conversation back to Gen Z. So I really just want to talk about the benefits that you receive after service, which is something we kind of touched on earlier. But my main issue is some of the main causes of veteran homelessness include the lack of affordable housing, PTSD, which hinders ability to work, which is commonly found in veterans, and then substance abuse problems. So my really big question is, what more can the military do to address these issues and curb the number of homeless veterans? This can be defined as like maybe implementing new law or changing the way it operates, maybe focusing more on mental health like we discussed. What are some good first steps that can be done to hopefully help curb the number of veterans who finish serving and become homeless. First person I want to kind of answer this question is you, Nate, because I feel since you have experience working in the military, you'll be able to offer some good perspective.
Yeah, this is another thing. You're just throwing out all the tough questions. I think the military and DoD in general is tried again. They've in the last 20 years. I'm fortunate because I was in the military when there was a ton of money going into it and a lot of focus on it because of all the issues, and after Vietnam and kind of this pushback and everything that went on during that era, there was not as much money going into the military. And then obviously in the 90s with the peace dividend, tons of money came out. There was a lot of issues. There are still some, plenty of lower ranking soldiers and service members that are still on food stamps and things like that to supplement their income. But before 9/11, it was even worse. And so how do we get, they've really tried to implement job search programs, like if as a service member is getting out, they're trying to connect them with jobs and give them opportunities and of course, job skills and there's job fairs that they put on and things like that. I think I'm not sure if it's necessarily, and again, I don't have data for this. I don't know what the core problem necessarily is, but I'm not sure if it's finding a job as much as it's going to be reintegrating into society from coming from a place where you had close brothers and sisters, where you were a part of a team, when even though a lot of military, like as TikTok is showing, they like to complain. There's a lot of like, oh, whatever, but there's the famous saying, like if there's, as a leader, you're not worried if the soldiers complaining to you, you're worried when they don't complain. And so that's going to always happen, but really deep down, I think people are appreciative of it and they value that camaraderie. And so when they come out of it, there's this, you're going back to a place that there isn't that, because even at workplaces, that's not the same thing. You're not going through the same difficult, challenging events that bond you and make you a team and together and feel like the other person deeper than you would normally. And so you go from that community to one that you don't know anymore. And I think a lot of what homelessness and is generated from is potentially hopelessness. So there's no purpose. You go back and again, like you don't have that connection. There's not the brotherhood, the sisterhood that you had. And you're like, what do I do with my life now? I don't necessarily even know anymore, or I don't have close friends. And then it's so easy to get spiral, begin a spiral of like, what am I doing with my life? And all these things. And so I suspect that might be something that feeds into, then all of a sudden, then you get stuck into addiction and then drugs, or you just want to go travel. And then it just becomes where you don't have any place to stay, and it kind of eventually turns into homelessness. Maybe, again, I don't have the data for that, but I suspect that it very well may be something tied to that. And so giving veterans a purpose and something and a connection, or getting involved in some kind of a group outside of the military when they leave would be a very important thing.
It offers a lot of good points. I think when I first thought about this, because these are some questions I really have when it comes to the military. I don't know a lot, so I'm always eager to learn more. And I just find it really crazy that a lot of homeless people that I happen to see every now and then are, veterans. So I think I can't help but think, what can be done to really, take care of the people that, serve and fight for this country. I feel like if anyone deserves, better treatment and better after service benefits, it should be them, because they've put their lives on the line. And it feels a little unfair when you see how they're living after their service. So I can't help but wonder what internally can be done to fix these issues, because there's only so much that we as a society can do. We have churches where we um I went to a church fair or like an event a couple weeks ago where they were just bringing in homeless people. So there's things like that. There's metropolitan ministries who I also volunteer with. So there's so much that we do as people, but I can't help but wonder what can the military do, to really give their take, to really, do their part in it. And there's so many issues that they need to do their part for. The next person I want to take a jab at, I want to take a jab at this is Alex. So I want to hear, what is your opinion on this issue?
Well, I think that to an extent, there's a lot of issues with veteran homelessness. For instance, my cousin, when he got out of the Marines, he had a very tough time finding a job because he didn't have an education, of course. But I do think that, it's not just the military that needs to be paying attention to this issue. It is also the government that also needs to be watching and paying attention as well. Because the fact that, the military doesn't just serve the people, it also serves the government. And I mean, it does make sense with what Nathan was saying earlier about, about them not losing their connections with, their lives, and they're going through basically a mental health breakdown. They don't know what they're going to be able to do anymore. And that's tough. You know, People need to have a purpose in life and feel like they have a purpose to do something. And if they don't, they're going to spiral out of control or just hit rock bottom. And, that's not something that we should want for anyone. You shouldn't want to have to say, oh man, I'm at the end of my rope. I mean, of course, chapters come and go with our lives, but we have to keep going. And, I do believe that the government does need to actually step in, especially with the military, with them losing these things, because, the moral of the story is not every member of our government or member of Congress has served in the military, and they don't know what the reality is like when people get out and they leave. Like, they don't know what their purpose is, because the moral of the story is not everyone lives this exact same life. Everyone has a different life where they come from. And, when they lose each other and they end up having to leave something, it's very hard for them. And that is something that not just the military needs to focus on with job fairs.
Our next section, I want to keep kind of brief because I'm really interested to talk about the future of the military, especially when it regards to Gen Z. So, my main question is, do you think we should advocate for a more balanced spending plan when it comes to, defense and, maybe assisting foreign nations? Is a more balanced plan, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you say is it a better option, but I guess, is it attainable? Do you think advocating for a balanced spending plan is attainable within, the US? The first person I want to kind of give their take on this is Nate. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think there needs to be some reevaluation of our defense priorities and money. I think oftentimes we say, China's a threat and Russia's a threat, and that's all true. But we have to understand that just throwing money at new programs isn't necessarily the way to go, especially with other issues that we have going on internally, and how we can better better prepare. We think in terms of defense, we think, oh, guns and bigger machines and better machines and whatnot. But what about education? An educated workforce and a great economy is very important for our collective defense, because it makes us better, more competitive economically, stronger, which is a deterrent in itself. And plus, I think there's just a ton of waste. Being in the, like I just saw, there's just a lot of waste. And so we could go a lot further if it was a more efficient organization, to be very honest and frank with you. And so I definitely am for freezing or even slightly reducing the budget in favor of other priorities. And so when we think, when we have to take our defense into consideration, we can also think about how they're also adding to that.
I think that's a really good perspective, and it's a good way to start off this conversation. I want to hear from Connor next.
Yeah, you know what? I take more of the isolationist approach when it comes to American foreign policy. and that means scaling back defense spending. I'm very much, America should keep to itself kind of person when it comes to that, and I'm just not in favor of, meddling in the affairs of far off backwater countries in parts of the world that Americans, most of them can't even point out on a map. How is that in the interest how is that in the best interest of the American citizen, of each American? I think people often conflate the interests of the U.S. government and the political establishment with the interests with their own interests. And what's good for the American political establishment is not necessarily good for us as citizens. So while yes, increased defense spending might be good for the private sector, for players like Lockheed Martin and such, who are signing all these lucrative government contracts to produce weapons and technology, and it's good for them, and it's good for career politicians, all these bureaucrats who are making a killing off of overstaying their welcome in office and advancing their career, and all this diplomacy and intervention in parts of the world that, in my opinion, shouldn't even be going on in the first place. I'd like to see a renaissance of the American homeland, and directing a lot of the money that we use to fund the military, this gigantic war machine, this monolith of American global hegemony that just reaches in whichever corner of the globe it wants. I'd like to see a lot of that money go towards, revitalizing our cities. America's cities are dumpster fires. That if you were to rewind the clock, 40, 50, 60 years ago, American cities, large cities, were safe places. You could walk at night without fear of being accosted and so forth. And there are places that people wanted to move to, families wanted to move to these places. Now you're seeing an exodus from American cities because they're unsafe, they're dangerous, and it's a real shame, because I feel like our infrastructure is being neglected at the cost of sustaining this unsustainable war machine, and it has consequences for us citizens. So I think scaling back the defense budget, not to ridiculous levels, because I am a believer in strength, and I do think that America needs a large and strong military, but only insofar as it's necessary to, you know, uh, perpetuate and uphold the Monroe Doctrine, which basically says that the Western Hemisphere is our sphere of influence, and any sort of foreign military operation that's set up inside our little corner of the world will be taken as a threat, and we're going to deploy our military to counter and neutralize that threat. Like the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62 is a great example. That's 100% a situation where I support using our military uh, as an instrument of change and statecraft. When it's right on our border in Cuba, then yes, we are going to use our military to protect our best interests. But in places like Ukraine or wherever, or all these far off parts of the world, there's an argument to be made of whether or not that's of interest to the average American.
I think that like is a really good take. And then as a member of like a younger member of Gen Z, I feel that it's important to consider these things, especially when we're talking about like the next couple of years when my peers may be considering joining the military. I think it's important to kind of keep an eye on foreign relations, as regards to the US, because certain conflicts are so brutal. And I'm also a firm believer of reinvesting into American society, because there are a lot of things wrong with the way we function, especially when it comes to our cities and schools. Like we have a lot of problems. And I think when we go out and try to help other people without really taking care of the problem at home, it makes us look kind of redundant. But I'm really interested to talk about the future of the military. And some members, like I said, my peers may be joining within the next couple years. So I just want to kind of leave this episode on a good note. And I want to ask, what will it take to convince more members of Gen Z to, become a part of the military or the army?
I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to this question. Because I think it comes down to like what your motivation for joining and like what your kind of situation and life circumstances and what your future plans and desires kind of are. So I think like when we previously talked about transitioning out, it made me kind of think about actually what occurs while you're in and the opportunities you're afforded while you're in. And I think not to kind of harp on that kind of question, but some of the breakdown does happen where people aren't taking advantage of the resources within because they're either not allowed to because of maybe politics within a certain unit you're working in, being able to get to those resources or even knowing they exist, right? It's not something that you think that everyone would know, but we're talking like I worked in military services at a college. So I firsthand worked with spouses, children, and active duty military, just starting their education journey. And there is a big, in my opinion, lack of, education on how to get involved. What is tuition assistance? How do I get it? How do I apply to college? Like maybe they didn't even want to apply to college. So, I don't want to backtrack too much on that, but there are a lot of, questions and concerns I think that we have there. But like, if you are someone who's a part of Gen Z that is kind of privileged enough to know the college application process and how that works, or that you can look into going to school with the option of joining the military as an officer. There are a lot of kind of paths you can take and leverage what the military has to offer. And that may be that during your time in the military, you're able to work up to a bachelor's degree, and then you get out and now your master's degree is going to be paid for with the GI Bill. And now we talked about the VA loan, and there's other benefits, right? That of course comes with the education and awareness of these opportunities, and not everybody is in a position to know about those. But for Gen Z, if you can and are able to do kind of the research into what those opportunities are, I think that there's appeal there, in setting yourself up for that type of success. But I just want to be very clear that not everybody's in a position to know about those things. But if you're listening, that there are definitely people that you can reach out to about, and it's a simple Google too, if you have computer access or library computer access. And so I think it kind of starts there when you're appealing to Gen Z, and their kind of personal motivation of maybe wanting better for themselves. That's as much as I could probably unpack in a short time.
I think that covers a lot of like the basics, especially when you're talking about being educated enough about the military, because even having this discussion, I'm learning a lot, but I'm also, really curious to learn more. There's so much to cover. So I think especially when you're considering joining the military, you have to get all of these questions answered because, it regards to you in your life and, what you're going to be doing for the next few years. So it's very important to, get these questions answered.
But what I would like to say is that what I think on how we need to appeal to young Gen Z voters, I mean Gen Zers, is on how they and why they should join the military is not just for education. Like, yeah, that is a key point and factor. However, we just need to, we want them and their families to feel that they will be safe and they will have a good future, in my opinion. And, safety is, of course, key because, we don't want, our men and women in arms to be sent to some part of the world to fight for a conflict that's not ours. And the other thing is safety at home. Sexual harassment and mental health are definitely key issues that need to be addressed, especially in the military world, because I think for my honest 2 cents on that is that there should be a zero tolerance policy, especially in the military, if you're abusing your authority and being, and that especially includes sexual misconduct and sexual harassment. Like if you're doing that, there needs to be harsher repercussions. And we should let recruits and trainees know that that will not be tolerated from the start. And that is how we can create a safer work environment and a safer military. I am a firm believer in peace through strength. Like, yes, we need to be, strong have our military force strong, and, to let other countries know not to take advantage of us. And that doesn't just go for our enemies like Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. We need to let our allies know, yeah, we will not let you take advantage of us just for our services. So, that is what I think needs to be improved upon. Mental health, misconduct in the military, and just overall peace through strength, because that is what our country should be, I believe, founded on, not, getting involved in the numerous conflicts and issues that we are right now seeing today. With what Connor said, we need to invest more in the defense budget for our homeland, not overseas conflicts. And there's a lot of issues that America needs to take care of.
I definitely agree. I like how you kind of listed, pretty almost like a list of demands as to what needs to change. And I think it's pretty reasonable what you're asking for, and it's probably what a lot of people are asking for. Before we close out, I just want to ask one more question, and this kind of circles back to foreign relations as we talked about. I'm sure you've noticed, recently that it's pretty tense when we're talking about foreign policy, right? Like there's China, who, we are very upset with. There's also the Israel-Palestine conflict, which everyone has eyes on, and are, I guess, eager to kind of understand the US's spot in all of this because, Palestinians are suffering. And I guess a lot of the world expects for the US to get involved in these issues. So I want to ask, like, as these tensions are really rising, how do you think Gen Z's feelings about joining the military are going to shift? This kind of goes back to what Alex said about, about what Alex said about, after the issue with Pearl Harbor and 9/11, those after those conflicts kind of, after really those attacks happened, there was a lot of encouragement and a lot of eagerness to join the military. So I'm curious to know, as the landscape of foreign relations change, as tensions get higher, how will this impact Gen Z and their feelings about joining the military?
Well, with all the tension that's right now going on in the world, for instance, I am a little bit on the fence with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but it does make sense why the United States does need to defend South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, because they are key major allies. But the thing is that we do need to make sure that our men and women in arms are safe and taken care of. And we do need to have a strong military. But, it is completely dishonest to say that there are countries that are not, enemy nations that will take advantage of America and our services. And that I feel is wrong. So I do think, it is totally dishonest to say that, oh, Gen Z doesn't see this. They do. They do see these things. And, they don't want to be thrown into a conflict. And we can't just get involved in every single lost cause. Like, for instance, with 9/11 and Pearl Harbor, it was necessary because we were directly attacked. But if we get involved in somebody else's conflict and, let's say, and this country like Ukraine doesn't have much to do with America to begin with, then we're just showing, oh, we'll just get involved in anything. And that's not how it should be at all. We need to create a secure and safe environment for, Gen Z to feel confident in joining the military, to know that they will have a safe future, and for their families to know that they will be protected, because, families, they're not just going to send their kids off. They're going to be like, you better take care of our children no matter what.
Yeah, I completely agree with Alex. I think that if it's an incident where, if it's a 9/11 or if it's a Pearl Harbor where Americans are directly attacked and there's a devastating, incident or situation where we know who did it, and it brings us to war, I think Gen Z will step up, and I think people will enlist. And the thing with I think that happens. It's human nature to we get into a lull. We get into kind of like this quasi comfortable. We're safe, and then a disaster happens. Something drastic happens, and it shakes everybody awake, and it makes everybody realize what's actually important and what is actually valuable. And so the differences and the things that we are fighting about now, like, which seem huge now, and ever, in the midst of disaster, priorities realign. We realize that we have a lot more actually in common, and that we enjoy being Americans more than we thought. And we realize what's really important, and that's protecting the values, which allow us to disagree, which allow us to have these conversations. And so if that were to happen, I think Gen Z would step up. I think Ukraine, even Israel, like they're much harder sells as far as especially getting American boots on the ground. I think that would be much harder sell. But if it's something that directly attacks us, Taiwan, I don't know. That'll be an interesting one. I'm not sure if it's obviously ambiguous whether we would get involved there, and I don't know if Gen Z would be fully on board with that or not. Just because the whoever the president is would have to really sell it to the American public and to Gen Z that Taiwan is a national security issue, and it's a vital interest. It's in our vital interest to defend them against China, even in a shooting war. And that'll be, if that happens, we'll see what happens. But
with that, I would like to close out. So thank you to these panelists for attending the podcast. And I ask if you have any social media handles and other promotions that you can. I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in. Please follow this podcast and other podcasts from Our National Conversation on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and everywhere podcasts can be found. You can also follow Our National Conversation on TikTok, Instagram, at Our National Conversation, on X/Twitter on our NATL Convo.